Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and in this week's video we're going to be talking about the Land Rover Freelander 2's fuel system and the journey that the diesel goes through and some of the engineering that's gone into the fuel system that keeps the car moving both on road and off. Let's start at the beginning of the diesel's journey at the fuel filler area. Obviously nothing too exciting going on here, but there are a few things that I'd like to point out. The first being the little drain hole that's located just before the fuel filler neck. Every now and then get a small amount of water in this area and check that it actually drains away out the bottom of the car. The last thing you want to happen is a bunch of water to collect in the area, which then finds its way into the tank when you next go to fill up the car. Another small but important feature in the filler neck is a misfueling system. If you look inside the fuel filler and see a yellow flap with a picture of an open book on it, then the misfueling device has been triggered. To deactivate it, there is a tool that will either be in the car already or you can purchase one online. Just be careful as to the quality of the tool, as the last thing you want is for it to break and end up surfing down the filler neck on its way to the fuel tank. The misfueling device is triggered when a fuel nozzle smaller than a diesel fuel nozzle is put into the fuel filler neck. This also goes for jerry cans, so just make sure you have a diesel sized spout screwed onto your jerry can before tipping any fuel into it. As for the diesel, well, you can fit 68 litres of the stuff into a Freelander 2, just make sure it conforms to the EN590 specification. Lastly, when you do fuel up, just be careful how much you try and cram in there, as there is a connection built into the start of the neck that lets the tank, pump and everything else breathe. Obviously if you fill it with diesel all the way to the filler neck, it's going to have a real hard time doing that. As a side note, if you ever notice what could be misidentified as smoke or vapour coming from the fuel filler neck when you're refueling, especially on a cold day, don't be too alarmed, that's just a bit of steam, and we'll get on to why that happens later in the video. With that said, let's move on to the next part of the diesel's journey. Let's start off by talking about the diesel tank itself. It's made from 6 layers of laminated blow molded plastic for strength. Saying the words diesel tank, you might automatically think of some kind of square or rectangle container that holds the fuel. Well, to give the Freelander 2 a decent sized fuel tank and to keep the weight and centre of gravity as low as possible, Land Rover have come up with this saddle tank that sits either side of the prop shaft and exhaust system. What this does mean that instead of one big tank, you have 2 smaller tanks, which Land Rover call the pump side, the usable side, and the other side being the unusable side. The main usable side is where all the action happens, as that's where the low pressure fuel pump is contained. You might automatically assume that the low pressure fuel pump is what sends the fuel to the front of the car, but believe it or not, that's actually the job of the high pressure fuel pump that's mounted onto the engine. The only job the low pressure fuel pump has to do really is to keep itself full of fuel so the high pressure fuel pump can pull diesel from it. With this setup, it allows the Freelander 2 to travel on gradients of up to 30 degrees without suffering fuel starvation and up to 45 degrees for 5 seconds. With the saddle tank design, there is one slight flaw in it though, as the diesel from one side cannot get to the other side short of splashing over the hump in the middle. To combat that, there's a crossover tube that runs from one side all the way over to the low pressure fuel pump to basically transfer diesel from one side to the other. Working out the fuel level on a tank like this is also a challenge. It's not a simple case of installing some kind of floating switch into the tank and simply using the theory as the more it drops, the lower the diesel level. Well, Land Rover have installed 2 floating fuel sender units in either side of the tank to fix this issue. That way, one floating fuel sender unit can tell if there's X amount of litres in one side of the tank. The other floating fuel sender unit can tell if there's Y litres in the other side of the tank. And then with a bit of maths in between, there must be Z litres in the tank in total. The other item to note is the continuation of the breather pipe that we said about in its filler neck. Well, that connects to the pump side of the tank and then runs inside the tank to the other side to prevent any vacuums forming. To sum up the diesel's journey up until this point, you fill up your car with diesel, that diesel then floods down the fuel filler neck and into both sides of the tank. The low pressure fuel pump then sucks it up from both sides and fills a collection pot. The high pressure fuel pump then pulls from the collection pot to drag the diesel to the front of the car. Now that the diesel has made its way to the front of the car, it now needs to be filtered before it can be used by the engine. The diesel filter has the main role of obviously filtering the diesel, but it also has a really important second job which we'll get to shortly. The diesel is being pulled down the supply line by the high pressure fuel pump to the supply in connector. It then falls into the pot, which has a paper filter inside, pulled through the filter and into the supply out connector. One thing you'll notice on the supply outside is that there is a little electrical plug on it. That plug is connected to a sensor that the diesel runs past, which picks up the temperature of the diesel. The other end of the plug is connected to the ECM, or engine control module for long. Once the diesel has been filtered and had its temperature read, it then moves on to the high pressure fuel pump, where, as the name suggests, it converts the diesel from low pressure into high pressure. Once it has done its magic, the diesel moves along the pipe that connects from the high pressure fuel pump and into the fuel rail. The fuel rail has a number of items on it to keep the high pressure diesel inside of it happy. On one side there is the fuel rail pressure sensor, which I feel is pretty self-explanatory for the job that it does. Then there's the high pressure pipes that connect the fuel rail to the injectors. You then have the high pressure fuel pump connector to supply the diesel. Next to that is the fuel rail pressure relief pipe and the fuel rail pressure control valve at the very end. To give you an example of when that comes into play, say for example you're at full throttle and then all of a sudden you come off the throttle entirely. There's suddenly going to be a massive spike in pressure as the rate in which the diesel is being provided is suddenly going to be too much for the engine. So the diesel then gets directed down the fuel rail pressure relief pipe and back towards a diesel filter. The diesel that's all nice and happy in the fuel rail then makes its way down into the 4 fuel rail to injector pipes. Any excess fuel not wanted by the injectors can be passed down the leak-off pipes, which then head back towards the filter. The diesel is then pushed to the injectors, which is then sprayed into the combustion chamber between a pressure of 230 bar or 3,336 psi all the way up to a staggering 1,600 bar or 23,206 psi. Now just repeat this entire process for the entire time the engine is running, and that's roughly how the fuel system on the Freelander 2 works. But wait, there's a couple of Brucey bonuses, as I only told you about 50% of the diesel filter's job and never answered the question about why sometimes you get steam from the fuel filler neck when refueling. You know how I said about all of those different leak-off pipes? Well, as you will know from earlier in this video, all of them small amounts of diesel all make their way back to the diesel filter. What I haven't said is when the diesel is being changed from low pressure to high in the high pressure fuel pump. This then warms up the diesel and a certain percentage gets pushed down the leak-off pipe and back to the filter. In the return line of the filter, providing you have a decent and well-known brand of diesel filter fitted, the fuel will hit a thermostatic valve. While the fuel is cold, the thermostatic valve in the filter will be closed and only 5 to 10% will be allowed to return to the diesel tank, while the other 90 to 95% will recirculate within the diesel filter. This then helps the diesel to warm up quicker, prevents the diesel from waxing, and just helps overall efficiency of the diesel burning process. Once the diesel gets above 20 degrees Celsius, then the thermostatic valve within the filter opens, which reverses where the fuel goes, and between 0 and 5% will recirculate in the fuel filter, with 90 to 100% heading back to the tank. With some diesel filters out there, they either lack the thermostatic valve or it just doesn't work at all. This then means the diesel constantly gets recirculated within the filter and doesn't get redirected back to the tank. The diesel within the fuel filter is then in an endless warming up cycle. The fuel temperature sensor along with the engine control module notices this, and the more the temperature increases, the more the ECM dials back the overall power from the engine to avoid overheating the diesel. This pattern will keep happening until there is hardly any power at all due to the temperature of the diesel. To fix this issue, simply get your filter swapped out with either a Bosch or Perflux filter. If you cannot get either of them, ask on the Freelander 2 Off-Road Group Facebook page or on the Thrill 2 forum what diesel filter they suggest. As for why you sometimes see steam when refueling, you're most likely to see it if you've been on a long drive and you don't have a huge amount of diesel left in the tank, where the returned diesel has been worked hard by the high pressure fuel pump, mixed in with any being returned by the fuel rail and injectors. If it's not needed by the diesel filter, it then works its way all the way back to the diesel tank where it drops in ready to try again on the second lap. Over time, the diesel in the tank warms up from the returned diesel. When you stop at a fuel station, that lovely warm diesel in the tank suddenly has a bunch of diesel from the fuel garage hit it, which is normally kept at about 15 degrees Celsius. As you can imagine, the temperature difference causes a bit of steam which finds its way out of the filler neck. Well, that's my take on how the Freelander 2's diesel system works. If you haven't already, make sure to give the video a like, that would be much appreciated. Check out the comment section down below for anything that I might have missed or got wrong. Other than that, all that's left for me to say is, if you want to see another video similar to this, then click up here. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click down here. Thanks everyone.